Her bookstore was crumbling, her sister's life threatened. She spilled scorching coffee on a cold, enigmatic stranger. He wasn't just a man. He was Damian Rossi, a mafia boss who seized her world, then annihilated anyone daring to touch his new obsession. Now trapped in his opulent cage, she wonders if salvation can truly taste so dark. The scent of aging paper and forgotten stories was Clara Vance's oldest memory, a comfort woven into the very fabric of her being. The Whispering Pages, her family's bookstore, wasn't just a business. It was a living, breathing entity, a sanctuary against the relentless roar of Brooklyn. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, slanted through the tall, arched windows, illuminating shelves crammed with tales spanning centuries. Every creak of the floorboards under her worn sneakers, every muted rustle of a turning page, echoed the history of her lineage. But lately, those whispers had been overshadowed by a louder, more jarring sound, the relentless ticking of a clock counting down her family's legacy. Clara ran a hand over the spine of a first edition Poe, its leather cover smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. Her heart, however, felt anything but cool. It was a frantic bird trapped in her ribs, beating against the overwhelming weight of despair. The stack of unopened bills on the counter was a monument to her failure. Red ink seeped from the edges of final notices, each word a venomous bite. Property taxes, utilities, overdue rent, a suffocating avalanche threatening to bury her alive. She'd skipped lunch for 3 days running, the familiar ache in her stomach a dull counterpoint to the sharper, more devastating pain in her soul. "Just breathe, Clara," she murmured to herself, the words a thin, fragile shield against the encroaching dread. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman younger than her 26 years suggested, but with eyes far too old. They held the weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights, of dreams deferred and hopes slowly eroding like sandstone cliffs. Lily, her 16-year-old sister, was the only reason Clara hadn't fully succumbed to the crushing pressure. Lily, with her bright, innocent eyes and unwavering faith in Clara, was the anchor that kept her from drifting into the abyss. A shrill ring from the antique brass bell above the door startled Clara, yanking her from her morbid introspection. Her shoulders tensed. It was rare to get a customer at this hour, and the heavy, expensive scent that now permeated the air was utterly alien to the comforting must of old books. A man stood framed in the doorway, a stark, unwelcome contrast to the warm, faded charm of her shop.mr. Thorne. He was a shark in a bespoke suit, every stitch screaming wealth and predatory intent. His silver hair, slicked back with an almost artificial sheen, seemed to reflect the harsh glare of the streetlights outside. His eyes, the color of cheap ice, scanned the shelves with an air of dismissive superiority, as if each precious volume were nothing more than kindling. "Ms. Vance," his voice was smooth, oily, a low rumble that grated against Clara's nerves. Still clinging to this relic, see? Clara forced a polite, though trembling, smile. "It's a bookstore, Mr. Thorne. A community fixture." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a chill down her spine. "A dying breed, like the neighborhood it sits in. Progress, Ms. Vance, is inevitable. And progress, unfortunately, tends to roll over anything that stands in its way." He strolled deeper into the shop, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the old wooden floor, a jarring intrusion. The scent of his cologne, sharp and metallic, hung heavy in the air, a chemical assault on her senses. "I've told you, I'm not selling," Clara said, her voice firmer than she felt. Her hands clenched, nails digging crescent moons into her palms. She hated the way he looked at her, as if she were a minor inconvenience, a fly to be swatted away. Thorne stopped at a table displaying new releases, picking up a copy of a critically acclaimed novel. He flipped through it, his expression disdainful. Such stubbornness is admirable in some circles, foolish in others. He met her gaze, his ice-cold eyes holding a subtle, yet unmistakable threat. "You have a younger sister, don't you, Miss Vance?" "Sweet girl." "Lily, isn't it?" Clara's breath hitched. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her carefully constructed composure. "Lily." The unspoken implication was clear, sickening. Her defiant hope, that fragile flicker she clung to, began to wane under the terrifying weight of his words. "What does Lily have to do with anything?" Clara's voice was a mere whisper, laced with a raw edge of panic. Thorne merely smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Everything, Ms. Vance. Everything. Imagine if something were to happen to this quaint little shop, or to those you hold dear. Life can be so unpredictable in this city, can't it?" He placed the book back down, deliberately misaligned. My offer still stands. Consider it before someone else decides to take matters into their own hands. People with far less tact than myself. He turned to leave, his departure as abrupt and unsettling as his arrival. The brass bell chimed mockingly as he exited, leaving Clara alone in the suddenly silent, dust-filled air. The metallic scent of his cologne lingered, a nauseating reminder of his presence, and his chilling warning her knees threatened to buckle. Lily. He knew about Lily. The loneliness she often felt was now compounded by a desperate fear that gnawed at her insides. She was trapped, cornered, with no allies, no power, and a sister whose safety now seemed to hinge on a decision she couldn't bring herself to make. As the last rays of sunlight faded, plunging the whispering pages into an oppressive gloom, Clara could only pray for a miracle. A miracle, or perhaps a monster. But she never imagined she would find both in one dangerous package, walking right through her door. The following afternoon, the quiet hum of the whispering pages was brutally shattered, not by Mr. Thorne's ominous presence, but by an entirely different kind of storm. The street outside, usually a sleepy thoroughfare, suddenly buzzed with the low growl of expensive engines. A procession of sleek, black SUVs, their windows tinted to an impenetrable obsidian, glided to a halt along the curb. Each vehicle gleamed under the gray Brooklyn sky, a stark, almost insolent display of wealth that screamed danger louder than any spray paint. Clara, busy shelving a newly arrived box of paperbacks, felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. This wasn't a casual visit. The men who emerged from the vehicles were cut from the same intimidating cloth, dark, perfectly tailored suits, expressions devoid of warmth, eyes that perpetually scanned their surroundings. They moved with a chilling efficiency, like a well-oiled, silent machine. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a severe face, entered the bookstore first, his gaze sweeping over the dusty shelves and Clara herself with an unnerving intensity. "Miss Vance." His voice was low, devoid of inflection. "Mr. Rossi's meeting requires your private reading room." Immediately, Clara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "It's not set up for meetings of that size. And I have customers." Her protest died on her lips as another two men entered, flanking the first, their presence a silent, irrefutable argument. The few lingering customers, sensing the shift in atmosphere, hastily paid and slipped out, their departures marked by hushed whispers and hurried footsteps. The bookstore, usually a haven, now felt like a stage set for something dark and unknown. Then he appeared. Damian Rossi. He didn't just walk in, he dominated the space. Taller than his men, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his impeccable dark gray suit, he moved with an unhurried, almost predatory grace. His dark hair, thick and slightly disheveled in a way that only emphasized its rebellious charm, framed a face sculpted from sharp angles and cold determination. But it was his eyes that truly captivated and terrified. They were the color of polished emeralds, startlingly vibrant against his olive skin, and held a depth of calculation that made Clara feel utterly exposed. He wore a silver watch that caught the dim light, a discreet flash of opulence, and the air around him crackled with an undeniable raw power. The faint, expensive scent of leather and something vaguely musky, dangerously masculine, preceded him. He didn't acknowledge Clara directly, his gaze sweeping over the bookstore with the same cold assessment as his men, yet with an added layer of discerning judgment. "The room, please," he stated, his voice the deep, resonant rumble that carried an implicit command. It wasn't a request. Clara, caught in the undertow of his presence, numbly led them to the small, intimate reading room at the back. It was usually a quiet alcove for literary discussions. Now it felt suffocatingly small. His men immediately began to set up, pulling out sleek laptops and laying out documents on the antique mahogany table, their movements precise and swift. "Coffee." "Black." "An espresso for the others," Damien commanded, turning to her for the first time. His emerald eyes locked onto hers, and Clara felt a jolt, a strange blend of acute fear and a dangerous intrigue she couldn't suppress. It was like staring into the eyes of a beautiful, deadly predator. She fled to the small, bustling kitchen area, her hands trembling as she brewed the coffee, the aroma of dark roast filling the air. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of thoughts. Who was this man? What kind of meeting required such an intimidating entourage? And why here, in her struggling bookstore? The questions swirled, unanswered, adding to her growing sense of powerlessness. She tried to steady her breathing, but the knowledge that Damian Rossi, this formidable, unsettling man, was just meters away, made her heart pound like a drum. Carefully, Clara balanced a heavy tray laden with steaming mugs and a plate of her meager remaining pastries. She had to weave through the labyrinthine shelves, her focus absolute. One wrong step and the thought was barely formed when it became a devastating reality. A loose floorboard, a slight shift in her balance, and the world tilted. Time seemed to slow. The heavy tray slipped, cascading downwards. A sickening clatter of porcelain, a rush of scalding liquid, and a strangled gasp escaped her lips. Hot, bitter coffee, black as night, splattered across Damian Rossi's immaculate dark gray suit. Dark, ugly stains bloomed instantly across his chest, down his arm, and worse, across the important, crisply printed document spread across the table. One large, crucial-looking diagram was now a soggy, dark mess. The room went utterly silent. A silence so profound, so heavy, it felt as though the very air had been sucked out of her lungs. Clara froze, her body rigid with pure, unadulterated terror. The scent of burnt coffee filled her nostrils, a bitter aroma that would forever be linked to this moment of abject horror. She could feel the lingering warmth of the splashed coffee on her own hand, a stark reminder of her catastrophic blunder. Damian's men, a phalanx of silent guardians, were on their feet in an instant, their gazes like sharpened knives directed solely at Clara. She could feel the icy blade of their collective fury, a palpable threat that made her stomach churn. Her mind screamed, "This is it. I'm dead. He's going to kill me." But Damian Rossi didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch. His face, usually a mask of controlled composure, remained chillingly placid. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down and picked up the ruined diagram, a single drop of coffee trailing down his index finger. His emerald eyes, usually so sharp, now held a terrifying, dangerous calm. They lifted slowly to meet Clara's wide, terrified ones. There was no anger, no visible rage, just a profound, unsettling stillness that was far more intimidating than any outburst. It was the calm before a predator strikes. "My apologies," Clara stammered, the words catching in her throat, tasting like ash. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Damian held up a hand, a silent gesture that cut off her desperate apologies. His gaze was unblinking, unreadable. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was Clara's frantic heartbeat thudding against her eardrums. She felt completely exposed, utterly helpless. She was a small, fragile moth caught in the glare of a dangerous, unstoppable force. Then a flicker. A minute, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. He gestured subtly to one of his men, who immediately began to clear the soiled documents. Damian, still meeting Clara's gaze, reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick wad of bills, bound by a silver clip, hundreds of dollars, crisp and new. He didn't offer it to her. Instead, he simply walked past her, his presence a heavy weight as he brushed by, and headed directly to the rare and collectible section. Clara watched bewildered as he ran a gloved finger along the spines of her most precious volumes. Leather-bound classics, signed first editions, irreplaceable treasures that were the heart and soul of her inventory. "These," he said, his voice a low, almost purring rumble, "and these. I'll take them all." He pointed to a shelf filled with rare Shakespeare folios, then to a collection of antique maps, and the entire set of Baudelaire over there. Clara stared, utterly stunned. "But those are worth a fortune. That's thousands of dollars." Her voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the thrumming fear that still vibrated through her. Damian Rossi merely turned, those emerald eyes fixed on her. He offered not a word of explanation, no hint of a reason. He simply held out the wad of cash, a casual, almost dismissive gesture of immense wealth. "Consider it compensation. For the inconvenience. And for your silence." His lips, thin and precise, curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "And I believe, Miss Vance, you now owe me a very important and perfectly dry set of documents." Clara felt a profound sense of confusion wash over her, eclipsing her terror for a fleeting moment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening her. He was buying her. Buying her silence, buying her bookstore, buying her time. The money, a dizzying amount that could solve so many of her immediate problems, felt like a golden handcuff. She watched, numb, as his men efficiently collected the designated books, carefully placing them into custom-made crates. This man wasn't just a powerful billionaire. He was a force of nature, operating on rules she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And she had just spilled coffee all over him. As Damien's men began to pack up their expensive luggage, his gaze found hers once more. "My business here isn't finished, Miss Vance," he stated, his voice a quiet promise that sent a fresh wave of unease through her. "Expect to see me again soon." He turned, his dark silhouette framed by the doorway, and disappeared into the rain-slicked street, leaving Clara alone amidst the sudden, echoing silence of her violated sanctuary. She was left with the acrid smell of burnt coffee, the bewildering weight of his money, and the chilling certainty that her accidental encounter with Damien Rossi had just begun to unravel her entire world. She had only meant to save her bookstore, but she had a terrifying premonition that she had just signed away something far more precious. The brief, bewildering reprieve Clara felt after Damien Rossi's departure evaporated under the brutal onslaught of Mr. Thorne's retaliation. His words, soft as a snake's hiss, proved prophetic. The first strike came 3 nights later, a dissonant symphony of shattering glass that tore Clara from a fitful sleep. She'd rushed downstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs, to find the front window of the Whispering Pages a jagged, gaping maw. A crude, blood-red spray-painted message marred the antique brick: "Sell or suffer." The acrid smell of fresh paint mixed with the biting cold wind, whipping through the new hole in her world. Her hands shook so violently she could barely dial the police, who, after a perfunctory report, offered little solace beyond a shrug and a keep an eye out. Her internal monologue was a frantic scream. Suffer. What else could I possibly lose? The bookstore felt like a patient bleeding out, and she, its only doctor, was utterly helpless. Despair, thick and cloying, clung to her like a shroud. The next morning, the terror intensified. Lily, usually bubbling with teenage chatter, was pale, her eyes wide with a fear Clara knew intimately. Someone called my phone, Clara," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "They said they knew where I went to school. They told me to tell you to sell the bookstore or else." The innocence in Lily's eyes was tainted, replaced by a shadow that twisted Clara's gut. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about family. This was a direct, devastating blow that Clara's rage was a hot, desperate fire, burning away the last vestiges of her caution. She wasn't just a bookstore owner anymore. She was a protective lioness, cornered and desperate. She spent the entire day cycling through every lawyer she could find listed for pro bono work, every legal aid society that might offer a glimmer of hope. Each interview was a replay of the last, empathetic nods, concerned murmurs, but ultimately, the same disheartening conclusion. "Mr. Thorne has considerable influence, Ms. Vance," a kind-faced lawyer, Ms. Davies, explained, her voice tinged with regret. Her office, usually a bastion of legal reassurance, felt like a judgment hall. The polished oak desk, the framed degrees, all seemed to mock Clara's meager resources. "His company, Meridian Properties, has deep pockets and even deeper connections. We've heard whispers, unsavory whispers, linking him to certain elements in the city. It's not something a small firm like ours can realistically take on without significant risk, both financial and personal." Ms. Davies' eyes, usually sharp and confident, held a flicker of genuine fear when she mentioned certain elements. The air in the office, usually smelling of old paper and stale coffee, suddenly felt thin, suffocating. Clara slumped back in the worn leather chair, the fight slowly draining from her. The sense of powerlessness was absolute, a crushing weight that left her breathless. Every door slammed shut in her face. Every avenue she pursued led to a dead end. She was at the bottom of a deep, dark well, and no one was throwing her a rope. What do I do? What do I do when they're threatening Lily? The question echoed in the hollow cavern of her mind, a desperate plea with no answer. That evening, a chilling drizzle turned the street slick and black. The bookstore, now dimly lit by a single, mournful lamp, felt colder than usual. The furnace, which had stubbornly sputtered to life for years, had finally given up the ghost that morning. Clara, wrapped in a threadbare cardigan, shivered, but it wasn't just the cold. It was the icy grip of defeat. She was scrubbing the remnants of red paint from the brick facade, the solvent burning her skin, the smell harsh against her nose. Each scrub was a desperate, futile attempt to erase the encroaching darkness. A shadow fell over her, darker than the night. Clara stiffened, her heart leaping into her throat. She slowly straightened, the old rag clutched in her hand. Damien Rossi stood there, a formidable silhouette against the backdrop of the city lights. He wore a heavy, dark overcoat that seemed to absorb the meager light, making him appear even larger, more imposing. His emerald eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a glint Clara couldn't decipher in the dim light. They swept over the broken window, the spray-painted threat, and finally settled on her, lingering on the despair etched on her face. The faint, expensive scent of his cologne, that dangerous, musky aroma, reached her even through the biting chill of the rain. Ms. Vance, his voice was a low, resonant rumble, cutting through the silence of the street. It appears your situation has escalated. Clara stared at him, resentment flaring. And you care, Mr. Rossi? Or have you just come to gloat? Her voice was raw, laced with the bitter taste of her recent failures. He took a slow step closer, then another, until he stood mere feet from her. His presence was overwhelming, making the small space around them feel charged, electric. I find myself inconvenienced by your continued predicament, Miss Vance, he said, ignoring her angry retort. It reflects poorly on my judgment to leave loose ends in my vicinity. Loose ends? Clara scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping her. Is that what I am to you? A loose end? Her hands trembled, not just from the cold now. You are a variable, Damien corrected, his voice devoid of emotion, that requires stabilization. And I am offering you a solution. He gestured vaguely to the damaged storefront. Thorne's antics will cease. Your utilities will be restored. Your sister will be safe. Clara narrowed her eyes, suspicion warring with a desperate, terrifying flicker of hope. What's the catch, Mr. Rossi? Men like you don't offer charity. His lips, thin and precise, curved into a faint, predatory smile that sent shivers down her spine. Astute. The catch, Ms. Vance, is simple. I will purchase the whispering pages. All right. For a sum that will erase your debts and provide for your sister's future. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In return, you will work for me. You will manage the bookstore, which will now be my property. And you, Ms. Vance, will live under my protection. Under my roof. Clara felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. The cold drizzle on her face suddenly felt scalding hot. Live, under your roof? What are you saying? This is a trap. The words were choked out, her voice barely audible. Damien's eyes, those unsettling emerald depths, held hers. A trap, perhaps? Or salvation? The choice is yours. Face Thorne's continued harassment alone, risking everything, including your sister's safety. Or accept my terms. A safe haven, security, and a future for Lily. All in exchange for your cooperation. His tone was calm, reasonable, yet held an implicit threat that was far more terrifying than any shouted command. It was the voice of a man who always got what he wanted, and was now laying claim. Her mind raced, a frantic blur of calculations. Or Lily. The broken window, the freezing store, the mountain of debt. And then Damien. Dangerous, controlling, undeniably powerful. His offer was a gilded cage, a surrender of her independence, but it promised something she couldn't find anywhere else, safety. For Lily. The thought of Lily's terrified face was the final, devastating blow. I can't just leave my life, Clara protested weakly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She felt a surge of resentment, a furious anger at being forced into such an impossible corner. Her freedom, her autonomy, everything she cherished, was about to be stripped away. You have no life left to leave, Ms. Vance, Damien stated bluntly, his voice cutting through her flimsy defenses. Only chaos. I offer order. He reached into his coat and produced a pre-printed contract, thick and official-looking, held between two fingers. Sign this, tonight, or I will consider you beyond my assistance. The subtle nuance of the last words implied something far more ominous than mere disinterest. It implied abandonment to a fate worse than Thorne. Clara stared at the contract, then at Damien's unyielding face. Her stomach twisted into knots. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a forced capitulation. A trade of one monster for another, only this one was offering protection instead of destruction. A sliver of desperate relief, cold and sharp, cut through her terror. Lily would be safe. That was all that mattered. Fine, Clara choked out, the word tearing from her throat. Her head pounded. I'll sign, but I want guarantees. For Lily, and for the bookstore. Damien's lips curved into that chilling, almost imperceptible smile again. Naturally, my protection extends to what is mine. And from this moment on, Ms. Vance, you and your little bookstore are very much mine." He extended the contract, a black pen magically appearing in his other hand. As Clara's trembling hand reached for the pen, a profound sense of foreboding settled over her. She was making a devil's bargain, trading her meager freedom for a terrifying, all-encompassing security. She was about to step into a cage, no matter how gilded. And she had a chilling premonition that once she entered Damian Rossi's world, there would be no escape. The sleek black sedan, its windows tinted to an opaque obsidian, slid silently through the labyrinthine streets of Brooklyn, carrying Clara further and further from the familiar, comforting chaos of her life. The scent of new leather, sharp and pristine, filled the car, a stark contrast to the comforting must of aging paper she was accustomed to. She sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest, each beat a dull thud against the crushing weight of her new reality. She was a bird, plucked from her crumbling nest, and now being transported to a gilded cage. The destination was a towering monolith of glass and steel in Manhattan, a penthouse apartment that screamed wealth and untouchable power. The elevator ride up was a silent ascent into a world she didn't belong to. Mirrored walls reflected her pale, anxious face and the stoic, unsmiling guard who stood silently beside her. When the doors hissed open, she stepped into a space that took her breath away, not with beauty, but with sheer, unadulterated opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panorama of the city, a glittering tapestry of lights that seemed to mock her confinement. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of expensive cleaning products and something vaguely metallic. The furniture was minimalist, stark, yet undeniably luxurious, a vast, charcoal-gray sofa, a gleaming glass coffee table, abstract art adorning pristine white walls. It was immaculate, impersonal, and utterly devoid of warmth. This was Damian Rossi's world, and she was merely an unwelcome, necessary fixture in it. He stood by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his silhouette framed by the glittering city. His dark suit, even now, seemed to absorb the light, making him a figure of potent, dangerous shadow. He didn't turn immediately, letting her absorb the shock of her new surroundings. The silence stretched, heavy, and oppressive. "Welcome, Ms. Vance." His voice, a low, resonant rumble, finally broke the quiet. He turned, his emerald eyes catching the city lights, flashing with an unsettling intensity. They swept over her, a slow, possessive gaze that made her skin prickle. "Make yourself comfortable. This is your home now." "Home?" The word felt like a cruel joke. "This isn't my home, Mr. Rossi," Clara retorted, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "This is a gilded prison." His lips, thin and precise, curved into that faint, predatory smile. "A prison that will keep you safe. A place where Mr. Thorne and others like him cannot touch you. Or your sister." His emphasis on her sister was a calculated strike, a reminder of the leverage he held. The first few days were a blur of simmering annoyance and stifling control. Clara tried to establish some semblance of normalcy, some small pockets of freedom. She tried to go for a walk, only to be politely but firmly intercepted by one of Damian's silent, ever-present guards. "Mr. Rossi's orders, Miss Vance. For your protection." "Protection? Or imprisonment?" she'd snapped, frustration bubbling over. The penthouse, despite its vastness, began to feel smaller with each passing hour. The polished floors, the unblemished surfaces, the lack of any personal touch. It all felt like a constant reminder that she was a guest, an asset, but never truly free. She spent hours in a small, beautifully appointed library he'd clearly designed for her, though she suspected it was more for show than genuine use. The books were mostly first editions, art books, heavy volumes she couldn't bring herself to fully immerse in. She yearned for the dusty, chaotic comfort of the whispering pages. She often found herself pacing, the soft pile of the Persian rug doing little to absorb the frantic energy she burned. Lily, however, was safe. Damian had arranged for her to stay with a distant aunt in a quiet, anonymous suburb, complete with round-the-clock, discreet security. He had even enrolled Lily in a prestigious private school, footing the bill without a word. Clara knew this not because Damian had told her directly, but because a thick dossier on Lily's new life had appeared on the glass coffee table one morning, open to a photo of a smiling Lily, oblivious to the shadowy forces protecting her. It was this silent, undeniable care that slowly began to chip away at Clara's rigid resentment. He hadn't just bought her bookstore, he had bought her sister's safety. A chilling thought, yes, but a true one. She felt a growing, uncomfortable dependence on him, a feeling she absolutely detested. The bookstore itself was undergoing a radical transformation. Damien had sent her a series of elaborate blueprints and renovation plans. The Whispering Pages was being expanded, modernized, yet somehow he had retained its soul. The creaking floorboards were now carefully reinforced, the shelves beautifully restored, a state-of-the-art climate control system installed to preserve the precious books. He even had a section dedicated entirely to rare poetry, a detail she had mentioned once in passing. His touch was lavish, precise, and utterly overwhelming. It was still her bookstore, but it was his vision. One evening, Clara found Damien in the penthouse's spacious, ultramodern kitchen, a stark contrast to her own tiny, cluttered one-back home. He was leaning against a black marble counter, a pristine white shirt accentuating the powerful lines of his shoulders. He held a tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. The subtle, musky scent of his cologne, usually a distant threat, now seemed to mingle with the faint aroma of fresh coffee. He had clearly just made himself a cup. "How is the progress on your project?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice felt oddly tight. He looked up, his emerald eyes sharp and discerning, meeting hers. "Efficient. The architects are competent. The builders understand the urgency." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, a silent question she couldn't quite decipher. "Are you satisfied with the modifications?" Clara hesitated. "It's more than I could have ever dreamed of," she admitted, the words tinged with a reluctant gratitude. "But it feels like it's not mine anymore." A faint, almost imperceptible shift crossed his face. "It is yours to manage. It is mine to own. A distinction you will learn to appreciate, Miss Vance." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes still on her, a gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. Later that week, she found him in the library, a rare first edition of Wuthering Heights open in his hand. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the room, painting his features in gold and darkness. He looked up as she entered, and for a fleeting second, the predatory mask seemed to slip, replaced by an expression of deep contemplation. He wasn't just reading, he was devouring the words, absorbing them. "Bronte," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, almost a surprise. A brutal tale of obsession. Clara felt a strange pull, a moment of shared understanding that transcended their current dynamic. "Do you enjoy reading, Mr. Rossi?" she asked, a spark of curiosity overriding her usual caution. He closed the book slowly, his fingers brushing the worn leather. The sound was soft, intimate. "Knowledge is power, Ms. Vance. And stories tell us who we are and who we might become." His gaze, as it locked onto hers, was no longer merely assessing. It was an intense, probing stare, as if he was trying to read the very depths of her soul. A warmth, unwelcome and unsettling, spread through Clara's chest. He rose then, moving with his usual unhurried grace. As he walked past her, his arm accidentally brushed hers. The contact was brief, electric. A jolt, like a static shock, shot through her. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable chemistry. His musky scent, now mingled with the faint aroma of old books, enveloped her, pulling her into his orbit. Clara felt her breath hitch, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. An undeniable, simmering attraction, dangerous and forbidden, began to stir within her. She found herself, against her will, observing him. The way his eyes narrowed slightly when he was deep in thought. The subtle tension in his jaw when he spoke on the phone. The unexpected gentleness with which he sometimes handled the books. He was a paradox wrapped in silk and steel, a man capable of chilling ruthlessness yet possessing an unexpected depth. But beneath the burgeoning fascination, the unease remained. She was always aware of the guards, of the hidden cameras. She'd spotted one disguised as a smoke detector, of the omnipresent sense of being watched. She was a possession, a valuable asset. The gilded cage was luxurious, but it was still a cage. And she was acutely aware that the man who held the key, the man whose emerald gaze seemed to follow her every move, held her entire world and her sister's fate firmly in his powerful hands. She didn't know what his game was, but she was trapped, irrevocably caught in his web. And she had a terrifying feeling that, despite herself, she was beginning to be drawn to the very spider that held her. The sterile calm of the penthouse, once a source of suffocating control, shattered for Clara with a single trembling phone call. It wasn't Lily's voice on the other end, but a frantic whisper from her aunt, Mrs. Jenkins. "Clara, dear, it's Lily. Something happened at school today. Someone tried to get her. Said they were family business, tried to pull her into a car. Thank goodness the security Mr. Rossi arranged was there, but she's terrified, Clara." "I'm terrified." The world tilted. The pristine white walls of the penthouse seemed to close in, the glittering city outside transforming into a predatory maw. Renewed fear, sharp and visceral, ripped through Clara, tearing away the fragile peace she had cautiously begun to build. Lily. Her sweet, innocent Lily, just a few short blocks from what should have been safety. The images flashed in Clara's mind. Lily's small hand being grabbed, her wide, scared eyes, the dark interior of a stranger's car. Bile rose in her throat, a sickening wave of nausea. Is she all right? Is she hurt? Clara demanded, her voice a desperate, raw plea that tore at her own throat. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles blanched. Her legs felt weak, threatening to buckle beneath her. She's fine, Clara. Shaken, but physically unharmed. Mr. Rossi's men were very efficient. They handled it. But it was close. Too close. The aunt's voice cracked with lingering terror, a mirror to Clara's own. Clara ended the call, her hand shaking so violently she almost dropped the phone. Thorn. It had to be Thorn. He hadn't given up. He was a wolf at the door, and he had dared to lay his teeth on the one person Clara would die to protect. The anger, cold and absolute, that had been simmering beneath her fear for weeks, finally erupted. It burned through her veins, a purifying fire. She wasn't helpless. Not anymore. She was under Damien Rossi's protection, and now she would demand its full, terrifying price. She found Damien in his study, a cavernous room with dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes far too serious for fiction, and a massive desk carved from black granite. The air here was always thick with the scent of old paper, rich leather, and a faint metallic tang she couldn't quite place, the smell of power, perhaps. He was on a video call, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he spoke in a language Clara didn't understand, his expression sharp, his emerald eyes glacial. Clara didn't knock. She burst through the door, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a desperate fury. "Lily," she choked out, unable to articulate more. "They tried to take Lily. Thorn, he's escalating. Your protection wasn't enough." Damien didn't flinch. He merely held up a hand, silencing the person on the other end of his call, and ended it with a decisive tap. His gaze, unblinking and devoid of surprise, landed on Clara. There was no question in his eyes, only a chilling, almost bored understanding. He already knew. "I'm aware, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice disturbingly calm, a stark contrast to the earthquake raging within her. "My men intercepted the attempt." As expected, Clara cried, incredulity and outrage warring in her voice. "You expected this? And you didn't tell me. You didn't do more to stop him." She felt a fresh wave of resentment. He had promised safety, but this felt like living on the edge of a cliff. He rose slowly, a formidable presence unfolding from behind the granite desk. The movement was unhurried, yet it conveyed an immense coiled power. He moved to the window, his back to the city, his hands clasped behind him. Mr. Thorn is a desperate man. Desperate men make foolish choices. He needed to be reminded of his place. This was merely part of the process. His voice was flat, utterly devoid of emotion. Clara stared at his broad, unyielding back, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Process? This isn't a game, Mr. Rossi. This is Lily's life. My sister could have been hurt. The words ended in a choked sob, the raw emotion tearing through her. Damien turned, his emerald eyes now fully focused on her, and something in their depth made Clara shiver. There was no softening, no comfort, only a chilling, resolute certainty. And she wasn't. Because my men were there. Because my protection, as you so derisively call it, works. Unlike the pathetic attempts you made to safeguard your own. His words were a brutal, unvarnished truth, cutting deep. So what now? Clara whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a profound sense of helplessness once more. He'll keep trying. He'll keep coming after us. A faint, predatory smile touched Damien's lips, a flash of white against the grim line of his mouth. No, he won't. His actions today sealed his fate. He crossed a line that should never have been approached. You are under my care, Ms. Vance. And what is mine, no one touches. Not with impunity. The cold precision of his voice, the utter lack of doubt, sent a profound shiver down Clara's spine. She felt a terrifying mixture of awe at his absolute certainty and sheer terror at the casual ruthlessness with which he spoke of another man's destruction. "What are you going to do?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Damien didn't answer with words. Instead, he led her to a smaller, more discreet lounge area she hadn't known existed. Two of his lieutenants, stern-faced men named Marco and Silas, were already there, their expressions grim. A large high-definition screen on the wall displayed a live feed, muted. It showed a dimly lit office, cluttered with files and framed corporate awards. Clara recognized it with a jolt. Thorne's personal office. "Observe, Ms. Vance," Damien commanded, his voice a low, dark purr. "This is how I deal with inconveniences." He gestured to Marco, who nodded once, a quick, almost imperceptible movement. Marco picked up a secure satellite phone, spoke a few clipped words in that foreign language, and hung up. The silence in the lounge was thick, punctuated only by Clara's ragged breathing and the low hum of the screen. Her eyes were glued to the image of Thorne's office, a chilling fascination holding her captive. Suddenly, a team of dark-suited men swarmed into Thorne's office, not with guns blazing, but with cold, surgical precision. They moved through the space, systematically collecting documents, hacking into computers, and planting devices. Then, the images shifted. A grainy, almost indistinguishable figure, clearly Thorne, was shown being roughly escorted from a lavish restaurant, his face pale and contorted in disbelief. More footage flashed. Frozen bank accounts, properties seized, corporate partners dissolving contracts in a panic. It wasn't about physical violence to him yet. It was about tearing his world apart piece by piece. Financially, socially, reputationally. He tried to play with the big boys. Silas, a man whose face was a study in controlled menace, murmured beside Clara. He overestimated his reach. And he touched what belonged to the boss. Clara watched, horrified yet utterly mesmerized. It was a ballet of destruction, orchestrated with chilling efficiency. Damien Rossi hadn't merely warned Thorne off. He was dismantling him, limb by limb, brick by brick. The ruthlessness was breathtaking, the casual display of such absolute power almost impossible to comprehend. Her stomach churned, but a grim, undeniable validation of his protection settled over her. Lily was safe, because Damien Rossi was a monster, and he was her monster. The final image flashed on screen. Thorne, now looking broken, being led into a police station, not for violence, but for a litany of financial crimes suddenly unearthed and presented with irrefutable evidence. He was being humiliated, systematically stripped of everything he valued. Then the screen flickered to another feed, a dark alleyway, where two of Thorne's former enforcers, the very men who had vandalized her bookstore, were being persuaded by Damien's men, no visible blows, but the chilling intensity of the interaction, the subtle threats, the fear in the enforcer's eyes spoke volumes. They would never bother Clara again. Damien turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "He is finished, Ms. Vance, and the message has been sent. Clearly, no one touches what is mine." The words hung in the air, a chilling, possessive vow. Clara felt a profound, unsettling peace mixed with a deep, creeping horror. She had witnessed the dark heart of Damien Rossi's world. It was a place of ruthless, unyielding power. He didn't fight fair. He didn't fight humanely. He simply won. And he did it all for her. The thought sent a shiver through her, a mix of fear and a strange, potent warmth. She understood now. The price of his protection wasn't just her bookstore or her freedom. It was her soul, slowly acclimating to the shadows of his dangerous world. She was tethered to him now, not just by contract, but by the unspoken bond of this shared, brutal experience. He was a terrifying protector, a wolf who had killed for her, and she was irrevocably caught in his powerful, deadly embrace. The world outside the penthouse, once threatening, now seemed utterly mundane compared to the tempest within. She was safe, yes, but at what cost? And what new terrors might emerge from the depths of Damien Rossi's shadowed empire, now that she was officially a part of it? The aftermath of Thorne's dismantling left an unsettling quiet in the penthouse. Clara, though relieved by Lily's safety and the bookstore's salvation, found herself adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. The fear for her sister had subsided, replaced by a lingering dread of Damien's ruthless capabilities. She was safe, yes, but the cost felt heavier than ever. She knew now, unequivocally, the dark power that protected her. It was late, a few nights after Thorn's public downfall. The city lights outside glittered, cold and distant, mirroring the emotional distance Clara still felt from her captor savior. She was restless, unable to sleep, the images of Thorn's broken face replaying in her mind. A faint, almost imperceptible sound drew her from her bedroom, a soft grunt, quickly stifled, from the direction of Damien's study. Her heart gave a curious lurch. He was usually silent as a shadow, utterly composed. This sounded a human. Vulnerable. Hesitantly, she approached the study door, which was ajar. A sliver of warm, golden light spilled into the darkened hallway, carrying with it the faint, familiar scent of old paper and that distinct, musky aroma of Damien's cologne, now tinged with something metallic. Blood. She pushed the door open gently, her breath catching in her throat. Damien was seated at his vast granite desk, his back to her, one shoulder bare. The impeccable dark suit jacket lay, discarded over a chair. A first aid kit, strangely small and clinical, was open beside him. He was trying to bandage a deep, jagged gash on his left bicep, his movements awkward, his jaw clenched in a silent grimace. The muscle in his arm flexed, tight and strained. The wound itself was ugly, an angry red line that broke the pristine canvas of his skin. Clara felt a sudden, unexpected surge of empathy. The formidable Mafia Boss, the architect of Thorn's destruction, was struggling with something as mundane as cut. He looked tired. Human. You're hurt, she stated, her voice softer than she intended, betraying the shock she felt. Damien froze. His head snapped around, his emerald eyes, usually so guarded, flashed with a fleeting moment of surprise, perhaps even irritation, at being discovered. A stark, unfamiliar vulnerability bloomed on his face before he quickly masked it. It's nothing, Ms. Vance, he replied, his voice rougher than usual, a subtle tremor underlying the controlled tone. He attempted to pull his shirt back on, a clumsy motion that only aggravated the wound. Don't be ridiculous. Clara found herself walking closer, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. Her hands, usually hesitant around him, now felt a strange purpose. Let me help. You're making it worse. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze intense, assessing, as if weighing her intentions. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, he lowered his arm, allowing her access. The surrender was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Clara's fingers, surprisingly steady, reached for the antiseptic wipes. The skin of his bicep was warm, smooth, yet taut with muscle. The cut itself was still weeping faintly. She cleaned it gently, the sting of the antiseptic making his jaw clench again, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on her face. She could feel the subtle tremor in her own hands as she worked, a mixture of nerves and a strange, unfamiliar tenderness. She noticed a faint, raised scar running along his shoulder blade, half hidden by his hair, an older, more sinister mark, hinting at a past far more violent than the cut she was tending. Where did this happen? She asked softly, her voice barely a whisper against the quiet hum of the penthouse. The metallic tang of antiseptic now mingled with his scent. A disagreement, he finally replied, his voice low, a rare concession. Nothing that concerns you. Everything that concerns you concerns me now, doesn't it? She retorted, her voice holding a hint of bitter truth. She meticulously applied a sterile dressing, her fingers brushing against his skin for longer than strictly necessary. The contact was unsettling, electric, creating a simmering heat between them. He watched her, his emerald eyes never leaving her face. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft rustle of gauze and the pounding of Clara's heart. When she finished, he flexed his arm, testing the bandage. Efficient, he murmured, a rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval. You're welcome, she said, pulling her hands away, feeling a strange void where his skin had been. She started to turn, to retreat to the safety of her own room, but his voice stopped her. Sit, Ms. Vance. It wasn't a command, not exactly, but an undeniable expectation. His gaze indicated the large, plush armchair opposite his desk. Clara hesitated, then obeyed, a newfound, reluctant fascination holding her captive. The chair swallowed her, its velvet cool against her skin. The study felt different now, imbued with a fragile intimacy. The city lights outside seemed softer, blurred by a fine mist. Damien poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, not the expensive scotch she imagined, but a dark, fragrant tea. He handed one to her. The warmth of the glass radiated into her trembling fingers. He leaned back in his chair, his bandaged arm resting on the polished desk, a rare posture of relaxation. "You asked why I am as I am," he began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to pull her into his confidence. It was a shocking, unexpected overture. Why the ruthlessness? Why the methods? His emerald eyes seemed to bore into hers, inviting her to truly see him. Clara just nodded, her breath caught in her throat. This was it, a glimpse behind the impenetrable mask. "My family," he said, the words slow, deliberate, each one heavy with unspoken history. "They built this empire, on blood and sacrifice. I inherited it, but inheritance comes with a debt, a burden." He took a slow sip of his tea, his gaze distant, lost in memory. "I saw things, did things, at a young age, to survive, to protect what was ours, what was mine." His eyes flickered back to her, raw, almost haunted look in their depths. "My father taught me that weakness is a luxury no one in my world can afford. That sentiment is a liability. That if you do not strike first, and strike hardest, you will be struck down." He paused, a deep, unsettling silence filling the room. The metallic tang of blood seemed to linger in the air. "I learned that lesson, brutally, repeatedly." Clara felt a chill crawl down her spine, but it was no longer just fear. It was a profound sense of curiosity, a yearning to understand the man behind the formidable facade. She saw the ghost of a younger, perhaps more innocent Damien in his eyes, a boy forced to become a monster. This was the burden of power, the scars etched not just on his skin, but on his very soul. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The emotional connection, hesitant and fragile, began to form, a thin thread weaving between them. He shook his head, a grim, decisive movement. "Stories for another time. But understand this, Ms. Vance. I am who I am because I had no other choice. And I do what I do to ensure no one I care about ever faces the same choices." His gaze, as it settled back on her, was intense, possessive, yet held a flicker of something she dared to call care. Clara felt a profound shift within her. The anger, the resentment, the pure terror, they didn't vanish, but they were now mixed with a potent blend of understanding, a reluctant fascination. He was still a dangerous man, a ruthless mafia boss, but she had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the armor, the hidden wounds that shaped his terrifying strength. He wasn't just a force of nature. He was a product of his own brutal history. And in that shared moment of vulnerability, a deeper layer of attraction began to simmer, dangerous and undeniable, pulling her further into his complicated, shadowed world. She felt a hesitant trust, a fragile sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to understand the monster who held her captive. She didn't know what this new connection meant, but she knew with a chilling certainty that it would change everything. The fragile bridge of understanding Clara thought she'd built with Damien after tending to his wound crumbled slowly, brick by agonizing brick, under the relentless weight of her burgeoning curiosity. The glimpse into his scarred past had not, as she'd hoped, brought solace. Instead, it had opened a Pandora's box of questions about her own past, specifically her father's. The subtle tremor in Damien's voice when he spoke of family debts and ruthless choices resonated with a forgotten fragment of her childhood, a hushed conversation, a worried glance between her parents, an envelope hidden deep in her father's old desk. Days turned into a suffocating routine in the penthouse. While the new whispering pages flourished under Damien's lavish renovation, becoming a sleek, modern literary haven, Clara felt increasingly untethered from it. Her days were spent overseeing details, but her nights were consumed by a quiet, desperate search. She began poring over old family photo albums, searching through boxes of her father's seemingly innocuous documents. She remembered the sheer terror when Damien's men had revealed the truth about her father's involvement with criminals to Ava. This story was different, but the echoes were chillingly similar. One chilly afternoon, sifting through a dusty box of her father's old accounting records, mundane, dry ledgers that usually lulled her to boredom, her fingers brushed against something stiff, tucked behind a thick stack of receipts. It was a faded, brittle newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, detailing a minor local scandal involving a construction company 20 years ago. The name on a clipping, bold and stark, struck her like a physical blow. Romano Enterprises. Beneath it, scrawled in her father's distinctive, neat handwriting, was a single, cryptic address in a forgotten industrial district. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, warning drumbeat. Romano. The name resonated with whispers she'd overheard Damien's men use, a name synonymous with power, violence, and the murky underworld he inhabited. Had her father, her gentle, bookish father, truly been involved with them? And if so, why had Damien, with his vast network of information, never mentioned it? A seed of doubt, cold and insidious, began to sprout in her mind, poisoning the nascent trust she had tentatively placed in him. She felt a gnawing need for answers, a desperate craving that overshadowed all caution. She knew Damien would forbid her from investigating. His protection was absolute, suffocating. But this wasn't about him. This was about her father, about the truth she deserved. That evening, a fierce autumn storm raged outside, the wind howling like a banshee around a penthouse, rattling the windows. Damien was away on one of his business trips, vague, unsettling absences that left Clara feeling both resentful and strangely bereft. It was the perfect opportunity. Clara scribbled a quick, vague note for Lily, just in case, claiming an unexpected errand. She dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, pulling a baseball cap low over her face. The guards at the penthouse entrance, familiar faces now, barely registered her departure, accustomed to her occasional supervised excursions to the renovated bookstore. She slipped past them, her pulse thrumming with a mix of fear and adrenaline-fueled determination. The thought that she was actively deceiving Damien made her stomach clench, but the truth about her father felt more important than his control. She hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address from the clipping. The ride was long, taking her deeper and deeper into the forgotten corners of Brooklyn. The familiar brownstones gave way to dilapidated warehouses, grimy factories, and empty, rain-slicked streets. The air grew heavy with the acrid scent of industrial decay, mixing with the damp chill of the storm. Each turn felt like a step further into an unknown, dangerous labyrinth. The taxi finally pulled up to a crumbling brick building, its windows boarded up, its facade scarred with graffiti. The address matched. The street was utterly deserted, swallowed by the oppressive darkness of the storm. The wind whipped her hair, carrying the metallic tang of rain and rust. Utter terror, cold and sharp, began to prickle at her skin. What am I doing here? This is insane. She paid the driver, who eyed her with a worried frown before speeding off, leaving her stranded in the desolate expanse. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. Clutching her purse tightly, Clara crept toward the building's entrance, a heavy, rusted metal door. It stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning her inward. The scent of damp earth and something vaguely chemical emanated from within. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn back to the false safety of Damien's penthouse. But the hunger for truth, for answers about her father, pushed her forward. She pushed the door open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest, the sound echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty space beyond. It was an abandoned warehouse, cavernous and cold, filled with shadows that danced in the dim light filtering from a broken skylight high above. Dust motes swirled in the heavy air. The smell of decay was stronger here, mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness she couldn't identify. Hello? Clara's voice was a shaky whisper, swallowed by the cavernous space. No answer. Only the drip, drip, drip of rainwater from a leaky roof and the distant moan of the wind. She took a cautious step inside, her eyes straining to adjust to the gloom. The floor was concrete, littered with debris. Her foot snagged on something, a loose pipe. She stumbled forward, a gasp escaping her lips. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her scream. Another arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her roughly backward, crushing her against a hard, unyielding chest. The scent of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne filled her nostrils, sickeningly close. Well, a gravelly voice hissed into her ear, sending shivers of utter terror down her spine. Look what the cat dragged in. The little bookworm, all alone. Rossi's precious little toy. Clara struggled violently, kicking and twisting, but the grip was iron tight. A rough hand reached up and yanked her baseball cap off, exposing her face. She saw a flash of other figures emerging from the deeper shadows. 3, perhaps 4 men, their faces grim, their eyes cold and calculating. No, don't struggle, sweetheart. Another voice, smoother, more sinister, emerged from the group. A man stepped forward, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but his expensive suit and cruel smile were unmistakable. He wasn't Thorn. This man exuded a different kind of danger, older, more ingrained. "We've been waiting for you, Clara Vance. We knew you'd come sniffing around your dear old dad's secrets." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. They knew. They had been watching, and they had been waiting. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a setup. "Trap. Rossi sent you, didn't he?" She spat, the words laced with raw fury as she struggled. "He knew. He used me." The thought ignited a desperate, consuming fire within her. The quiet conversations, the shared tea, the intimate moments she had nurtured a hesitant trust, all of it felt like a cruel, calculated manipulation. The man with the cruel smile chuckled, a low guttural sound. "Rossi? Oh, little girl, you truly are naive. Damien Rossi knew everything. He knew about your father, knew about his debts, knew about the Romano family and their lingering claim." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "He just chose to play dumb, to bring you into his web so he could claim you and all your father's old connections for himself. He always did like to collect pretty things, didn't he?" Clara's world shattered. Betrayal. A cold, sharp blade plunged into her heart, twisting with agonizing force. Damien, protector, her reluctant savior, had known all along. He had used her vulnerability, her desperation, to pull her into his orbit, not for her safety, but for his own twisted game. Her father's past, a tragic secret she had unknowingly carried, was merely leverage. His protection was a lie, a sophisticated manipulation. "He lied to me," she whispered, the words a heartbroken sob, the fight suddenly draining from her. The sense of profound despair was overwhelming, eclipsing even her fear of the men holding her. She had been a pawn, a tool in his ruthless game. All the hesitant trust, the burgeoning attraction, the fleeting empathy she had felt for his scars, it was all a cruel illusion. "Oh, he did more than lie," the man sneered, his smile widening. "He orchestrated this. He knew your father's past would draw you out. He knew we'd be waiting. And he did nothing to stop you." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "He just wanted to see if you were worth the trouble. No, it seems you are. For us, at least. He abandoned you, Clara. Left you to the wolves." The words echoed in the vast, cold warehouse, each one a hammer blow to her already broken heart. Abandonment. Manipulation. She was utterly, completely alone, her small, defiant flicker of hope extinguished. Damien hadn't just controlled her. He had orchestrated her downfall, letting her walk into this abyss. She felt an absolute powerlessness, trapped not just by the men holding her, but by the devastating weight of Damien's betrayal. The scent of industrial decay, mixed with the sickening perfume of her captor's lies, filled her senses, and Clara felt the bitter, burning sting of tears. She had run from one wolf, only to be thrown to a pack by the very man who had promised to keep her safe. The darkness of the warehouse seemed to swallow her whole, mirroring the gaping chasm of her despair. She closed her eyes, praying for a swift end to this nightmare. But the chilling laughter of her captors told her that her ordeal had only just begun. The call came as a jarring intrusion into the cloistered world of Damien Rossi's high-stakes poker game. He sat in a private, opulent suite overlooking the glittering Las Vegas Strip, chips stacked impossibly high before him, his face a mask of impenetrable calm. His opponents, seasoned players with decades of experience, watched him with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Then his secure burner phone, a device reserved only for emergencies of the direst kind, buzzed. Marco's voice, usually a paragon of composure, was tight with urgency. "Boss, it's Clara. She's gone." The world seemed to tilt. The vibrant lights of Vegas, the clinking of chips, the hushed murmurs of the game, all faded into a meaningless background hum. Damien's calm facade, honed over decades, cracked. A cold, lethal fury, more potent and dangerous than any he had ever felt, erupted within him. Gone? Clara, the defiant bookworm, his reluctant charge, his unexpected fascination. The woman he had just begun to see as his. "Explain," he commanded, his voice the low, dangerous growl that silenced the entire poker table. His emerald eyes, usually calculating, were now burning with a primal, untamed rage. The men around him instinctively recoiled, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, the palpable threat emanating from him. Marco's voice, clipped and efficient, painted a devastating picture. Clara's frantic flight, the newspaper clipping about her father, the abandoned warehouse, the silence from the burner phone she'd been given. The final, damning detail, the Romano family boss. And someone else. Someone who knew about her father. Someone who was waiting for her. Waiting for her. The words were like a red-hot poker to Damien's soul. They had used her curiosity, her grief, her sense of betrayal against her. They had engineered this. And he, Damien Rossi, had allowed it. He who prided himself on control, on foresight, on absolute protection, had let her walk into a trap he himself had inadvertently helped lay. The shame, the self-recrimination, mixed with a white-hot, all-consuming fury. Find her, Damien snarled into the phone, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that promised unspeakable retribution. Every resource, every man. Tear this city apart if you have to. I want her back. And I want the head of every single bastard who laid a hand on her. He slammed the phone shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. He stood, pushing away from the table, chips scattering like dust. His opponent stared wide-eyed as he stalked toward the door. Game's over, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an implicit menace that no one dared question. He was no longer a businessman, a gambler. He was a predator unleashed. Within minutes, his private jet was screaming through the night sky, a dark missile aimed at Brooklyn. From the moment he stepped onto the plane, Damien was a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. Maps, satellite feeds, intel reports, they flashed before his eyes. He didn't sleep, didn't rest. His mind, usually a cold steel trap, was now a furnace, burning with a singular purpose, Clara. The warehouse address, extracted from a terrified informant under Marco's persuasive touch, blazed on his tablet, a forgotten corner of the industrial district, surrounded by decaying buildings and shrouded in the lingering remnants of the autumn storm. Perfect for hiding. Perfect for a kill zone. 24 men, boss. Marco's voice crackled over the comms, just as the convoy of black SUVs, led by Damien's armored vehicle, approached the target. Heavily armed. They're expecting us. Good. Damien's voice was a low growl, his eyes fixed on the crumbling brick facade of the warehouse. He gripped the cold, heavy weight of his custom-made pistol, the metal a familiar extension of his will. Let them. His fury was a tangible force, a suffocating presence in the confined space of the SUV. He tasted blood, metallic and sharp, on his tongue, a premonition of the violence to come. The ambush was swift, brutal. As the lead SUVs pulled within sight, a volley of gunfire erupted from the warehouse. Windows shattered, tires exploded. Damien's men, seasoned warriors, returned fire with chilling precision, but Damien didn't wait. The second his vehicle screeched to a halt, he kicked open the door, a dark, lethal blur in the chaos. He moved like a phantom, driven by a rage that was both focused and utterly primal. Each shot he fired was precise, aimed at incapacitating, neutralizing. But his true intention was a devastating storm of close-quarters combat. He was a force of nature, a fury unleashed. The smell of gunpowder, acrid and biting, filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fresh blood. The shouts of men, the deafening crack of gunfire, the shattering of glass. It was a cacophony of death, and Damien was its conductor. He was a hurricane of muscle and ruthless instinct, a dark blur weaving through the smoke and debris. A man with a shotgun rose from behind a stack of crates. Damien moved with impossible speed, disarming him with a sickening crunch of bone, then used the shotgun to take down two more. He didn't just fight. He systematically dismantled his opponents, his movements fluid and deadly. He was searching, his emerald eyes blazing with an almost inhuman intensity, scanning every shadow, every corner. Clara. Where is she? The warehouse was a chaotic ballet of violence. His men, loyal and deadly, moved around him, a protective shield, clearing a path. But Damien was a singular, unstoppable force. He kicked down a rusted metal door, the clang reverberating through the structure, revealing another dimly lit section. His gaze swept over it, bypassing the struggling figures of his men and the enemy. His eyes, honed by years of seeking weakness, locked onto a pillar. And there she was, Clara, tied to a support beam, heavy zip ties biting into her wrists, her hands secured above her head. Her dark hair was disheveled, streaked with dust. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, but her eyes, wide with a mixture of intense fear and something akin to disbelief, met his. The sight of her, vulnerable and broken, ignited a fresh, terrifying inferno within Damien. The rage that had been simmering now exploded, raw and untamed. He saw the man who had been sneering at her, the one with the cruel smile, now retreating behind a stack of barrels, a glint of a knife in his hand. The same man who had orchestrated her capture, who had spoken of her father's past, who had dared to touch what was his. Leave her. Damien's voice, usually so controlled, was a guttural roar that ripped through the cacophony, silencing the warehouse for a terrifying beat. Every head snapped toward him. The raw, unadulterated menace in his tone made even his own men flinch. The man, startled, stumbled, but recovered, grabbing Clara by the hair, yanking her head back. A glint of steel at her throat. "Drop it, Rossi," he screamed, his voice trembling with a desperate fear of his own. "Drop your gun, or the girl dies." Clara's eyes, wide and terrified, met Damien's. "No, Damien," she cried, her voice hoarse, broken. Don't let him." A primal growl tore from Damien's chest. His finger, already on the trigger, hesitated. His hand, usually steady as a rock, trembled with the effort of control. He looked at Clara, truly looked at her, the fear in her eyes, the desperate plea. For a fraction of a second, the entire empire he had built, the power he wielded, the ruthless control he prided himself on, it all became utterly meaningless. Nothing mattered but her. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his gun. The clatter of metal on concrete echoed through the sudden, fragile silence. He pushed it forward with his foot, sending it sliding across the floor. The man laughed, a high, triumphant cackle. "See, little bookworm, this is what power looks like. He values you more than his life, more than his empire. Now, Rossi, you're going to. Marco. Now." Damien's voice was a chilling snarl, cutting through the man's gloating. Before the man could even register the command, Marco, who had been a silent shadow, a ghost moving through the chaos, materialized from behind the pillar Clara was tied to. He fired. A clean, precise shot to the man's knee. The man roared, a choked scream of agony, dropping the knife with a clatter. Damien didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, a dark, unstoppable force. He tackled the screaming man, slamming him against the concrete floor. The sounds that followed were brutal, sickening. Punch after punch after punch. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't business. This was pure, unadulterated, unleashed fury. Blood splattered onto the concrete. Damien didn't stop, his chest heaving, his face a mask of primal rage, his emerald eyes burning with a vengeance that promised complete and utter annihilation. "Boss, enough," Marco shouted, rushing to Clara's side, cutting her restraints with swift, practiced movements. But Damien didn't hear him. He was lost in the red haze of his own wrath, punishing the man not just for Clara's capture, but for daring to exist, for daring to touch what was his. Clara collapsed to her knees, her freed hands rubbing at her chafed wrists. She didn't look at Marco. Her eyes, still wide and tear-filled, were fixed on Damien, the man who had faced down an army for her. The man who had dropped his weapon had risked everything the moment she was threatened. The monster who would burn the world to ashes just to get her back. He finally stopped, his chest heaving, his hands shaking, covered in the enemy's blood. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his powerful frame radiating a raw, untamed danger. His eyes, still blazing with residual fury, met hers. And then something broke within him. The rage softened, a flicker of profound relief washing over him, quickly followed by a heartbreaking tenderness. "Clara," he breathed, her name a rough, ragged sound, a desperate prayer. She launched herself forward, propelled by a surge of overwhelming relief and a fierce, undeniable wave of profound love and gratitude. She stumbled, then ran, straight into his arms, burying her face against his blood-splattered suit. He wrapped his arms around her, a vice-like grip that was both crushing and utterly protective. It was tighter than any cage, stronger than any armor, more encompassing than anything she had ever known. His musky scent, now mingled with gunpowder and blood, filled her senses, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt truly, utterly safe. "You came," she sobbed into his chest, her hands clutching his jacket, clinging to him as if he were her last lifeline. "You came." His voice, rough with emotion, rumbled against her ear, a vow whispered in the chaos of battle. "I'll always come, little bookworm," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm against her skin. Always. Even if it burns everything to the ground. His hand slid to her still trembling back, holding her impossibly close, a primal declaration of possession and absolute devotion. She was his. And no one, absolutely no one, would ever touch what was Damien Rossi's again. The warehouse, once a terrifying stage for Clara's ultimate despair, was now a blur of sirens and flashing lights as Damien's men efficiently cleared the scene. Clara, wrapped in Damien's blood-splattered coat, felt a terrifying detachment. Her body trembled uncontrollably, not from cold, but from the raw trauma that had ripped through her. The scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood clung to her, a brutal reminder of the abyss she had stared into. Damien's arms were a steel cage around her, grounding her to a reality that felt surreal. His heart hammered against her ear, a frantic, animalistic rhythm that echoed her own. Back in the pristine, unnervingly quiet penthouse, the aftermath felt even more stark. Damien's doctor, a gruff, efficient woman, checked Clara for injuries. Beyond the chafed skin on her wrists, a few bruises, and a searing headache, she was physically unharmed. But her mind was a battlefield. Images flickered behind her eyelids, the cruel smile of her captor, the glint of the knife, Damien's eyes blazing with a fury that had terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Damien watched her from across the room, his clothes now changed, but a shadow of the recent violence still lingering in his emerald eyes. He said little, but his presence was a constant, formidable anchor. He personally brought her a mug of chamomile tea, its warmth radiating through the porcelain, but her hand still shook too violently to hold it steadily. He simply took it and with a surprising tender patience brought it to her lips, ensuring she drank. His fingers, calloused and powerful, brushed her jaw, a fleeting, almost possessive touch that sent a shiver down her spine. The initial wave of betrayal she'd felt in the warehouse still stung, a persistent ache beneath the overwhelming relief of her rescue. "Rest," he commanded, his voice rough with exhaustion, and an emotion Clara couldn't quite name. "Marco will bring Lily here in the morning. She is safe." Clara clung to those words, the promise of Lily's safety a balm to her wounded soul. She drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by nightmares of shadows and screams. Over the next few days, Damien transformed into a relentless, silent caretaker. He never left her side for long, his imposing presence a constant reminder of both her confinement and her newfound security. He brought her meals, light, nourishing broths and fresh fruit, ensuring she ate even when her stomach rebelled. He would sit in the armchair in her room, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just staring out at the city, a sentinel against unseen threats. His touch, when it came, was always deliberate, firm, yet strangely gentle, a hand on her back as she walked, a thumb brushing away a stray tear she hadn't realized was falling. This quiet, unwavering attention, so different from the controlled passion she'd glimpsed, fostered a deeper, more profound sense of vulnerability in her, dissolving some of her rigid defenses. But beneath the surface of this newfound comfort, the debt of blood was being paid. Clara heard whispers, hushed phone calls from Marco, sharp, decisive commands from Damien. She saw glimpses of news reports on the large screens in the penthouse. Muted but devastating, prominent construction magnate Mr. Thorne, arrested on multiple counts of fraud and racketeering, company assets frozen. Then, more chilling, key figures in Brooklyn's Romano crime family found, eliminated in a series of targeted attacks. No details were given, but the grim faces of the news anchors, the stark language, spoke volumes. One evening, as Clara sat in the study, trying to read but unable to focus, Damien entered, his posture rigid, his emerald eyes cold steel. He walked directly to his desk, picking up a tablet. He didn't offer it to her, but tilted the screen so she could see. It was a grainy, almost abstract image. The man with the cruel smile, her primary captor, now a broken, bloody mess, his face swollen beyond recognition, tied to a chair in a dark room. He was alive, barely, but utterly, irrevocably destroyed. His eyes, once full of malevolent glee, now held only raw terror. Beneath the image, a single terse caption. He talked. Clara gasped, a horrified sound tearing from her throat. Her stomach churned violently. What did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The image was a chilling testament to Damien's earlier fury unleashed. Damien looked at her, his expression devoid of remorse. He confessed everything. His ties to Romano, his orchestrating your father's accident, his current employer who wishes to remain anonymous for now. His voice was flat, clinical. He implicated every man who laid a hand on you, every man who threatened Lily, and every man involved in your father's demise. Clara stared at the tablet, then at Damien. The full, terrifying scope of his vengeance, his absolute control, washed over her. It wasn't just a threat. It was an immutable law. He had delivered justice, swift and brutal, far beyond anything the legal system could offer. This was the true cost of his protection, the dark underbelly of his absolute care. She saw the price of her safety, etched in blood and fear, and felt an uneasy, almost sick understanding. The man who led them, Damien continued, his eyes meeting hers, holding her gaze captive. The man who claimed to know your father, who said he'd been watching you for months, he is being dealt with. Personally. And his secrets will be laid bare. His voice held a chilling promise of further, deeper retribution. A fresh wave of residual fear washed over her, a shiver running down her spine. This wasn't just a man. He was an avenging angel, a force of nature whose wrath was as absolute as his protection. She knew with a chilling certainty that the man on the screen and those like him would never threaten her again. But the knowledge came at a price. Her innocence, her naive belief in a world of simple good and evil. She looked at Damien, his strong, unyielding profile, and realized that her salvation was inextricably linked to his darkness. His methods were brutal, uncompromising, but they were devastatingly effective. Her father's killers, the men who had orchestrated her abduction, were being systematically, irrevocably destroyed. For the first time, a grim acceptance of his dark methods began to settle in her soul. It wasn't right, but it was effective. And it kept her and Lily safe. He reached out, his powerful hand cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, his gaze intense, possessive, yet holding a hint of tenderness. No one touches what is mine, Clara. No one. The debt of blood has been paid. And now you are truly safe. His words were a dark vow, a terrifying comfort. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. She was a woman irrevocably changed, forever marked by the shadows of his world. The pure terror had receded, replaced by a complex tapestry of emotions, a deep, visceral gratitude, an uneasy understanding, a lingering fear of the depths of his power, and a profound, undeniable, deep emotional connection to the formidable man who had waged a private war for her. In his arms, surrounded by the silent, shimmering proof of his ruthless devotion, she felt a renewed sense of security, a chilling, undeniable truth. She might be in a gilded cage, but this cage, forged in blood and fire, was now her sanctuary. And the monster who held the key was undeniably, inextricably hers. Sometimes, the most gilded cages are the ones that offer the truest freedom. Clara's journey reminds us that our past wounds, the desperate choices we make, do not define our worth. Instead, they are the crucible in which our resilience is forged, revealing a strength we never knew we possessed. It's in those dark, terrifying moments when we feel utterly broken that true salvation can appear, often in the most unexpected and dangerous forms. Damien Rossi, the ruthless mafia boss, found his own redemption in protecting Clara, proving that even the most hardened hearts can be healed by a love fierce enough to burn the world down. He saw her fragility and cherished it, recognizing the warrior within. If this story resonated with a part of your soul, if it made you believe that even in darkness, love can find its fiercest light, then you are not alone. You are part of a community that understands the power of a love that transcends fear, a love that saves and possesses, demanding nothing less than everything. Join us. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments. I'm claimed by love. Together, let's explore more tales where passion battles peril and devotion becomes the ultimate shield.